let's start with the review here. In chapter 1, Lewis argues that 1, there is a real right and wrong, to which all humanity is subject. It's referred to, this is one of the things that you almost need a scorecard to keep track of. He refers to this real right and wrong as the law of human nature, the law of decent behavior, the moral law, and fair play. So when you see those phrases pop up throughout, it's all referencing back to the same thing. That was his first point from chapter 1. Then, this law is universal because, unlike scientific laws, like gravity, the law of human nature can be broken. You know what? Oh, this law is universal, but unlike scientific laws, like gravity, the law of human nature can be broken. Secondly, Lewis points out that in spite of our constant appeals to this law of fair play, none of us consistently keep it. Okay, so if you weren't here last week, that's a basic summary of it. You can go back and watch the video if you want, but there it is, which leads us to Lewis' introduction to chapter 2. Here we go. If they are the foundation, I had better stop to make that foundation firm before I go on. Some of the letters I have had show that a good many people find it difficult to understand just what the law of human nature or moral law or rule of decent behavior is. Now, opening question. The title of chapter 2 is Some Objections. After last week, can you think of any objections that someone would raise as an argument against the law of human nature?
Maybe that right and wrong is cultural or learned in a classroom.
Okay.
I think the classroom part is mentioned in chapter 2, but maybe that'd be an objection.
Yeah, that's a tough thing about this question. If you've actually read the chapter, like your mind probably naturally goes to the arguments that Lewis makes. But no, that is cultural. That's definitely an argument. Someone raised.
I think another one is just that there can be one, like that those disagreeing people from the opening part of chapter number 1 are agreeing that there's one right behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And in our society, it's like everybody has their own.
Yeah, it's pluralistic. Yeah,
pluralistic. I heard that.
Yeah. Okay, any others?
So someone mentioned the philosopher, I always forget how to pronounce his name, like Nietzsche. You know, like kind of just on the train of thought that he has overall, that basically that it's just a result of basically an imperfection inside us that we need to like basically transcend above. So even if, like, as Lewis points out, that you could say it's universally true throughout, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it actually is coming from a reality rather than just human imperfection.
Yeah.
So human imperfection leads to a sense of right and wrong?
Yeah. Yeah, like the very notion of right or wrong inside of each person is just coming from their lack of intelligence, let's say.
That's almost quasi like Hindu sort of Western or Eastern philosophy sort of thing. Because Nietzsche was a German, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder if he was influenced by that. I don't know if Lewis addresses any of Nietzsche's philosophies in any of his writings, but that would be fascinating to read. So cool. Any others before we move on to the next one? We'll see if these get addressed, the cultural, the pluralistic, and the and almost that's a figment of the imagination of sorts. Jeremy, would that be a fair way to say it as well, or?
Yeah, I think so to some extent. I guess
Yeah.
it's like that, but more specific, probably towards just like the lacking in our ability.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, I think that that point of view is fairly popular right now.
Yeah.
I remember, you know, 8 years ago, 12 years ago, there was a lot of discussion about, we talk all about right and wrong. There is no right and wrong. There's only beneficial and non-beneficial. People trying to redefine it based on, again, on self-interest.
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed like that was being pushed by certain people, political or education or showbiz or whatever, saying that it's immature to hold to an idea of right and wrong, that there is good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
People want to believe that there's neither, it's just choices.
Yeah, and even that, going back to quoting the fact that there's nothing new under the sun, quoting Solomon, I mean, that would seem also to flow very neatly from, Hindu, Buddhist sort of philosophy that, right and wrong is beyond, or, is just a human convention, which Lewis does kind of, address in a sense, not the,
He hits that actually, yeah.
yeah, without stealing too much of our thunder here. Okay, well, hey, good thoughts, and we'll see if Lewis tackles any of these as we go through this, or if we want to take some time to tackle them as we go along as well. Down to number one, objection number one. The moral law is only part of our herd instinct. Let me type that in. The moral law is only part of our herd instinct. I thought it would be good, and by saying that, I basically mean that I needed to do this from keeping my own thoughts straight, but I thought it would be good to actually look up the definition of herd instinct. My mind naturally goes to instinct, and when I think herd, all I can think of is my experience growing up on a farm. So let's look at the definition here. What's the definition of a herd instinct? It is an inherent tendency to congregate or to react in unison. Two, the second definition, a theoretical human instinct towards gregariousness and conformity. So somebody's raising the argument with Lewis that this whole idea of moral right and wrong is all basically kind of a groupthink sort of reality. Now, keeping that in mind, I thought this is my great contribution to this week, that I'm just patting myself on the back, this next part. I thought it might be good to utilize the chat feature of this. So in the group chat, so people don't have to feel like they have to talk, why don't you guys list out some herd or human instincts? Like if I say to you human instinct or herd instinct, let's take a minute or two and just type in what comes to mind as you guys hear that phrase. So on your mark, get set, go. Turtle. It's one of those classes I see. One of those classes. Teenage conformity. Okay. Yes, need to protect the young. I'll buy that. Instead toward violence. Okay. Care for the elderly. Saving our children. See that? Kind of have that stated another way up above. World peace. In-N-Out burgers. Okay. The In-N-Out burgers, no doubt, typed by somebody
No
in
one
this.
can resist it.
Unless there's a commercial that I'm not aware of, the In-N-Out Burgers, I'm assuming, is a California cultural reference.
More towards the Western U.S. Unfortunately.
Recycling. Okay. Mahomes got them to come to.
Now, see, I want to meet that guy.
Laughter. Ooh, okay. Laughter could be an instinct. Yeah. Depends on who you're around, I suppose. Progressive. Ooh, what do you mean by progressive?
Using it within new age context.
Okay, like help me out.
Well, progressive Christianity, for instance.
Okay. So would you put that in the herd instinct or human instinct or both?
Herd in the context of, like, say you believe that because that's like something that people are saying today, so you have conformed to it.
Okay.
And just like kind of trying to like hit on the overall like idea of basically like ideas today. Most of the people are like thinking that and saying that, like relativism, which is of course we're going to tackle, is largely like, why is it more accepted today versus before? It's because of the conformity today. That's what like large groups are saying today. So people are just herding into that.
Okay.
Kind of just taking that.
Okay.
As though it's their own.
Cool. Let's see. Instinct to simply survive. Yeah. Survival instinct for sure. Sharon, don't speak ill of the dead. Oh, okay. Sharon, in response to that, I read an article once about how culturally in the United States, we believe in justification by death culturally. And I think that kind of stems from that concept. Like I have a funny joke about a priest who was asked to speak at a funeral of a real hooligan, and but I don't know if you guys want me to share that now. It's not inappropriate. It's just a rabbit trail. Let's see. I won't state that, Melissa. Just don't get written out of the will, guys. Tony and Melissa, don't get written out of the will. Okay. Okay. Well, when I think of herd instinct, I mean, again, it's tough not to think outside of kind of our own general experience. Man, I don't know. I don't know if this meets the technical definition of an herd instinct, but boy, I think about a lot of the kids I work with at Moline, and even over the years, like there was I assume you all remember the game Flappy Bird. I don't know if that's technically herd instinct, but boy, everyone and their mother just had to have Flappy Bird when that was the game. Trying to think if there's any deeper examples than that I can give, but
my thought on herd mentality was the lemmings. I mean, you just blindly fall in line and go.
Yeah. Yep. No, that's a good visual example too. But now I'm thinking of the Lemmings video game. Anyway, sorry, I'm depraved. Fortnite. Okay. Yeah, no, there could be an element of that. And the Carl boys have joined in on that Lemming Fortnite parade. Oh gosh. Okay. We're going to put a mute on the Lanhams here in a second. But anyway, okay, well, let's move on. I mean, clearly I am not the thinker that Lewis is. And so I'm going to look at what he said about in response to this herd instinct argument. And we'll see if I have to, slam anyone here. Let's see. Oh, okay. Yeah. And real quick in response to Sharon. Yeah, I agree. There's certain celebrities that kind of cycle through this, cultural relevance, and it is very much herd instinct to kind of follow along and love them. I don't know. I'm thinking of music examples, but yeah. Well, let's see how Lewis, somebody who's smarter than me, addresses this. Back to our notes. For example, some people wrote to me saying, "Isn't what you call the moral law simply our herd instinct? And hasn't it been developed just like all our other instincts? Now, I do not deny that we may have a herd instinct, but that is not what I mean when I say, that is not what I mean by the moral law. We all know what it feels like to be prompted by instinct, by motherly love, sexual instinct, or the instinct for food. It means that you feel a strong want or desire to act in a certain way. And of course, we sometimes do feel just that sort of desire to help another person. Pause. That was referenced in the chat, helping people as an example of a herd instinct. Back to the notes here. But feeling a desire to help is quite different from feeling that you ought to help, whether you want to or not. Supposing you hear a cry for help from a man in danger, you will probably feel two desires. One, a desire to give help due to your herd instinct. One, a desire to give help due to your herd instinct. And I think I have a typo there. Going to the book. Okay.
I think you just misplaced the comma there, Scott.
I think so. I think you are right. Well, and
The other.
yeah. I put a period there. Yeah. Sorry for this. This is the danger of you guys agreeing to go through this on the first round, because we discover some of these little errors that need corrected. Okay, back to it. The other, a desire to keep out of danger due to the instinct for self-preservation. But you will find inside you, in addition to those two impulses, a third thing which tells you that you ought to follow the impulse to help and suppress the impulse to run away. Now, this thing that judges between two instincts, that decides which should be encouraged, cannot itself be either of them. Okay. And I think that's really, when you're talking about the moral law, probably the proper framework to kind of always square it up in, like, in regards to herd instinct to do A, B, or C. If herd instinct is truly kind of an evolutionary trait that we just happen to have, the fact that we have this thing outside kind of weighing and helping us to weigh and judge which one to follow, is pretty clear that that it is something, and Lewis obviously makes the case that it's the moral law. So he's not done though. Let's go to the top of the second page of the notes, and I'm going to type the word for that next blank. Top of page 2, 3. Here's the word. Counterexamples. 3 counterexamples. Not blind mice. Not blind mice, Brian Smith. Oh, and it just showed up. Sorry. Got to change that. Let's see. I know the Lanham saw it.
There we go.
There you go. Yeah, 3 counterexamples. 3 counterexamples. I'm sad to not see the contents here, because I was thinking of Jeff with this first example. Counterexample A, sheet music versus musical notes. Quoting Lewis, you might as well say that the sheet music which tells you at a given moment to play one note on the piano and not another is itself one of the notes on the keyboard. The moral law tells us the tune that we have to play, but our instincts are merely the keys. And I thought that was a good example. Even if you're not musically inclined like myself, we all have a general understanding of how the music process works. You have the score that tells you the notes to play, and it's the instruments that ultimately are the things that are playing, not the piece of paper itself. Next, part B, the moral law. Oh, let me type this in. Judges. The moral law judges between instincts. And Lewis already alluded to that in the first part of this section. But continuing on, if two instincts are in conflict, and there is nothing in a creature's mind except these two instincts. Obviously, the stronger of the two must win. But at those moments when we are most conscious of the moral law, it usually seems to be telling us to side with the weaker of the two impulses. You should want to be safe much more than you want to help a man who is drowning. But the moral law tells you to help him all the same. And surely it often tells us to try to make the right impulse stronger than it naturally is. We are not acting from instinct when we set about making an instinct stronger than it actually is. And in my mind, going back to my minimal knowledge of evolutionary biology, I mean, if we're just all, biological creatures that are the result of the randomness of evolution that brought us here, then we should be driven exclusively by these instincts. We shouldn't have something governing them. And so I think Lewis, again, is spot on using this as an illustration to point to the moral law as something that is there and is beyond the instincts. Third example, the goodness of an instinct varies. Therefore, the moral law cannot be one. Okay, what did Lewis mean by that? From page 11. If the moral law was one of our instincts, we ought to be able to point to some one impulse inside us, which was always what we call good, always in agreement with the rule of right behavior. But you cannot. There is none of our impulses which the moral law may not sometimes tell us to suppress, and none which it may not sometimes tell us to encourage. It is a mistake to think that some of our impulses, say motherly love or patriotism, are good, and others, like sex and the fighting instinct, are bad. All we mean is that the occasion on which the fighting instinct or the sexual desire need to be restrained are rather more frequent than those for restraining motherly love or patriotism. Continuing on in page 11. Think once again of a piano. It has not got two kinds of notes on it, the right notes and the wrong notes. Every single note is right at one time and wrong at another. The moral law is not any one instinct or set of instincts. It is something which makes a kind of tune by directing the instincts. And then last, from that same section, the bottom of page 11, continuing on to page 12 in the book. The most, next blank, dangerous. The most dangerous, that's that last blank there on page 2. The most dangerous thing you can do is to take any one impulse of your own nature and set it up as a thing you ought to follow at all costs. There is not one of them which will not make us into devils if we set it up as an absolute guide. You might think love of humanity in general is safe, but it is not. If you leave out justice, you will find yourself breaking agreements and faking evidence in trials for the sake of humanity, and become in the end a cruel and treacherous man. Okay, question number 2. We just talked about these 3 counterexamples that Lewis brought up. Which of these 3 counterexamples stands out most to you and why? How would you adapt these counterexamples if you were to use them in a conversation today?
Without God, moral impulse. With God, moral choice.
Okay. You want to expand on that, Mike?
Probably not, but basically what I've been reading is that without God, God sets the morals. So without God, morals is an impulse, and everybody's impulse is going to be different, so no 2 morals are going to be the same.
Okay.
With God, you have a choice to follow morals that are constant and right.
Yeah, and you know what? That plays nicely with regards to what Lewis said in the prior chapter about basically the moral law being a standard, by which we judge everything off of. So no, I think that's a good thought.
I think what that was getting to, though, is that without God, you don't have a moral standard.
Well, it's relative. It's relative, yeah.
I'm saying
it's impulsive. Yeah.
and it's different for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Correct. No, that is good. That is good. Now, to be clear, Lewis has not gone. He's not gone that far yet, and sadly, we actually won't. We won't be going with Lewis all the way to Christianity and the Bible as that moral standard, but he is absolutely setting the stage for that, for sure. So, anyone else?
I just really liked the music notes one
Mm-hmm.
because there's so many choices. And I guess because that's been one of the things that my kids, I'm looking over at my piano. That's one of the things that my kids have been doing to kind of entertain themselves. And just listening to them, they don't know how to read music, but even just trying to pick it out, you can tell which ones sound close to right or not quite right. And there's all those choices, and there's some, even as you're trying to figure it out and you can't read the music, there's some that work better than others, or there's a closer choice. And I think that kind of shows the difficulty in navigating moral law, because not everything is black and white. I mean, some things are, but I like the black and white of the sheet music, and then all the choices and the keys.
Well, and for somebody, and if there's anyone here who is more skilled in music than I, please jump in. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the more advanced you are in music, as far as I understand it, I mean, you have greater flexibility to bring in different combinations of notes and that sort of thing, to really amplify, what the music is saying on the page, or really amplify the beauty, if we were going to use the parallel of the moral law. So yeah, no, I agree with that. I do agree also, and I'm glad you made this point, Janelle, that this is not saying that everything is morally relative. No, not at all. I mean, the moral law is the standard. It's what governs the impulses and the instincts. So, and when done in concert, that's what I'm looking for. When done in concert, we get something beautiful. So, anyone else?
I think Janelle's point is true unless you're talking about jazz. Jazz is the anarchy of music.
That's incorrect.
We used to have a saying, if we in our choir in college, if we hit a wrong note, hit a sour chord, someone would say, "Well, it's close enough for jazz."
Where's Jeff Condit when we need him to weigh in on a matter? Like this is just seems cookie cutter for him. I don't know. Okay, well,
I've got something. When I read your summary of the moral law judges between instincts, my mind went back to when I was in high school, and then a little bit later, there was a movement in trying to deal with teen pregnancy to give out condoms to high school students, to just hand them out. And the reasoning is because you can't expect a high school student to choose to not follow their sexual instinct. And the assumption was evolutionary, basically. And I think that's part of an effort to basically try to erase the moral law from our society. As we allow more and more evolutionary thinking, that totally eliminates the authority of a moral law, because then it becomes a construct instead of what is really true. And I think so. I think that Lewis uses examples that prove that doesn't work.
Yeah.
But it's nevertheless, it's still applied. People are like, well, how do you expect me to choose? Of course I had to hit him back. The fact is, we can choose, and in certain situations, if we don't, we're in trouble no matter what. So that is, I think that's an assumption that's out there and prevalent, but Lewis shows us how short-sighted that is.
I'm trying to think off the top of my head if there's what historical societies, cultures embrace natural law as a reality outside of the Judeo-Christian framework. Because, yeah, I mean, and even thinking back, I mean, I'm sure to approximately the time that you're referring to, I'm thinking of some of the conversations my parents and or grandparents would have where you could just make the case saying, hey, you know, that's right or that's wrong. And everyone kind of accepted it because we had a common cultural understanding, which was rooted in this. But yeah, I mean,
prominent in a culture per se, but it was in philosophy.
okay.
Rousseau's Noble Savage is an example where basically in a godless worldview, you still have moral law.
Yeah, I would say stealing would be pretty common. I would say in probably I would think every culture, you steal something. Maybe it would differ what the punishment would be, but I would say most cultures would agree that stealing is wrong. My thought.
Yeah, I agree with that. There is some cultures that don't, though, because I know a friend of mine was working in South Africa, and the problem they had in the farms there is if something was laying on the ground and you weren't using it, it was free to pick up by the natives. They felt it was free to use and free to them because you weren't using it.
Huh.
But if you went to that neighbor's hut, and if you went to that neighbor's hut and took something that belonged to him, to that native's hut, wouldn't he consider that wrong?
No, they didn't.
Yeah.
Their culture said if it wasn't in use, it was free for you to use.
Huh.
It was. I mean,
There's a rule though; it has to be not in use. They can't take it out of your hands. And
no, it has to be laying unused because there was like for example, let's say he needed a wheelbarrow. You had one in your yard you weren't using. He could go get it. Now it's his wheelbarrow.
Mike, it sounds to me based off of what you said that to that culture, then it's not that they necessarily don't believe in stealing. It's just that they don't believe that is stealing.
there you go.
Possibly, yeah. I could agree with that. I think that would be true.
That's a good answer.
Maybe they don't believe in ownership.
Well, we would call it stealing, but in their culture, maybe it's not stealing.
Well, and let me weigh in. I mean, and maybe it just on like depends because I would imagine if one of the natives' wives was sitting around, I can't imagine they'd be okay with the neighbor coming and stealing the wife. And
I don't think that applied. No.
yeah. So is it reasonable to say they might view that as a form of stealing? But yeah, well, and yeah. Without being an expert on that culture, I mean, I can't speak to, I can't speak to anything outside of Mike's experience. My mind, as you were talking, Mike, was going back to what Lewis talked about. Gosh, man, I'm getting book 1 and book 3 confused now. But he makes the point that we do all have this universal sense of right and wrong called fair play. But where it differs when you start looking at applications in different cultures is to who it applies to. And maybe in a more broader general sense, I mean, when you look at the ideas of fair play within Islam, they apply to other Muslims, but they don't apply once you go outside people in Islam, at least from a more, not orthodox, what's the word I'm looking for? A more fundamentalist, somebody who's more fundamentalist in their practice of Islam, sort of thing. So I'm sure the idea of fair play is still prevalent, even if it's not there in that specific example that Brian brought up. So,
Hey, Scott, could you comment on Melissa's chat?
It is his granddaughter's birthday. He might be with the junior convicts. I don't know. I'm not familiar with their family, so it might be the kid's birthday. I don't know. Oh, the next one. Oh, gotcha. Let's see. When I read this section, I wrote in the margin about the instincts trained into a soldier. Okay. And how, but then if something happens, post-traumatic stress results, creates another strong instinct to fight against the other. But in that, a moral law still exists and tries. Gosh, how would I respond? How would Lewis respond? Well, it's interesting to note, but Lewis actually was a soldier. He fought in World War I. Yeah. I mean, he was actually in the trenches, so he saw a lot of this.
To be clear, the second part was in response to my father. The witch thing was in response to his stealing. C.S.
Oh.
Lewis talks about burning witches and how it's no longer done, but it's not because of a change in the moral law. It's due to the realization that witches aren't real.
I was saving my witches section for some grand fun transition, but no, I agree with you. I think that is applicable here. Yeah. Melissa, is your point with regards to the soldier that the moral law is still at work, even with the instincts being, I won't say adjusted, but yeah, jump in and clarify. Okay. All right. Sure. Yeah. So, but there is a sense of a moral right and wrong, and that is still universal even in those cases. But boy, now you got me thinking about. Now you got me thinking. You know what? If I've learned anything from Jordan Peterson, PTSD and its effects are way outside my purview in terms of expertise. So I'm not even going to venture to weigh in on the dynamics of all that. I will just simply say that the moral law, I am confident the moral law is still in play with regard to those people, even if certain instincts have been turned off or turned back on. Pastor Jerry, do you want to jump in?
I agree. I think the fact that soldiers are still responsible to make moral choices regardless of what their orders are.
Mm-hmm.
They're, what's his name in the My Lai massacre in Vietnam? That commander was prosecuted and jailed because he followed an order that was illegal, and it resulted in the death of a wiping out of a village. And so there's no excuse not to follow the moral law, even though you're being conditioned to follow orders.
Well, and isn't that even the foundation of the Nuremberg trials, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's the same exact thing. Yeah.
The appeal, yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous to put the Nazis on trial afterwards for anything other than, you were doing a morality that we didn't like. And Lewis makes a similar point in here.
Yeah.
If there's no universal right and wrong that all people instinctively know.
Yeah, the whole concept of war crimes makes no sense without it.
Yeah. All right. Let's, in the interest of time, move on to the top of page 3 and objection number 2. Objection number 2. The moral law is only a social convention. The moral law is only a social convention. Quoting Lewis, other people wrote to me saying, isn't what you call the moral law just a, wait for it, tricky on my part. Same phrase for 2 blanks in a row. Anyway, isn't what you call the moral law just a social convention, something that was put into us by education? I think there is a misunderstanding here. The people who ask that question are usually taking it for granted that if we have learned something from our parents and teachers, then that thing must be merely a human invention. But of course, that is not so. Pause. This next illustration is one of the reasons that my heart beats for C.S. Lewis. We all learned the multiplication table in school. Well, we were supposed to. A child who grew up alone on a desert island would not know it, but surely it does not follow that the multiplication table is simply a human convention, something human beings have made up for themselves and might have made up different if they had liked. The question is to which class the law of human nature belongs to. Okay, yes, and I know Lewis didn't specifically take that further, but again, the point he's making is this child that is out on this South Pacific island, clearly uses mathematics that are consistent with our multiplication tables, whether they represent it that way or not. And he couldn't have made up anything else. Like, it's not something that's just purely up to cultural herd instinct, to tie it back to the prior argument. But okay, next. And again, patting myself on the back for this is as brilliant as I get. Let's go back to comment in the group chat time. Two things. First, what are some examples of social conventions? What are some other examples of constant laws similar to mathematics? So when you list it out in the chat, please put like a dash or something noting whether you're calling this a social convention or a constant law. So we'll chat time here for a minute or two and see what you guys put in. On your mark, get set, go. Mackenzie and Will, you will be the second group here in this class to be threatened with being kicked out. That is math heresy right there. Wow. Wow. Manners, that is a good one. I think the manners one is interesting because I think there is a very clear tie to the moral law, but there are definitely manners that are not like moral law-ish. I'm reminded of that every time we have supper as a family. So you don't know. I can't kick them out, but I can chastise them, Melissa, and I'm happy to do so. Whoa, Bethany Baptist Church getting deep there.
I'm not seeing those texts sometimes.
What's that, Mike?
I'm not the questions that they pop up. I'm not saying them. So you're just making random statements. I don't know what the heck you're talking about.
Oh, hey, down at the bottom there should be. If are you on an iPad, Mike?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. If anyone is technically savvy, because I'm on a desktop, is there a way on the iPad or on a tablet of some kind to have the chat notes constantly listed?
It's up in the right-hand corner under More.
Got it. Thank you.
I love it. Live tech support.
Yeah, that hides half the faces, but that's okay.
My face is worth hiding.
Unfortunately, yours isn't.
Tony, that wasn't funny. Oh my goodness. The bureaucratic mentality. That bureaucratic mentality, what my mind goes to, Pastor Jerry, is the word hierarchy and patriarchy. That's very common nowadays. But I do agree with you that having kind of setting things up in hierarchies has been the foundation for pretty much every civilization, culture, going back to the very first one.
Policy over principle.
Yeah. Let's see. Constant.
That's on Star Trek.
What's that?
Star Trek 4. Wait a minute. No. Yeah. After they destroyed the Enterprise.
Constant law. Earth's rotation around the sun. You know what? And I wish. I hope we have somebody who's more scientifically savvy than I am. I think if I remember some of the most recent documentaries I've watched, technically the Earth rotating around the sun is slightly variant and is kind of changing ever so slightly that there'll be a point in time where we will spin off out of the sun's gravitational field. I think I saw that on Disney Plus. I mean, not one of the cartoons, like one of the like National Geographic ones. H2O. Respect your teachers. Yes, respect your teachers indeed. Especially this one. Humans will destroy. It's possible, Mackenzie. Humans could possibly destroy the Earth. We came wicked close in the '60s. It does. Whether you are a believer or a secular-minded person, the Earth is finite. It is not infinite. That is agree. We can't find a whole lot to agree on nowadays in our culture, but that one we can. Let's see. Before COVID, if the seats are not all filled, don't sit. And don't pick your nose in public. I would say if the mask thing has been anything positive, the fact that there is much less public nose picking. I mean, I see that as a win, but hey, and don't get caught. Yeah. I would expect nothing less from Atlanta. Okay.
You're driving in a car, they can't see you pick your nose. So,
especially if you're wearing your mask in the car. So I wear mine in the shower. Okay, just kidding. All right. Well, I think the group chat portion of this has devolved to such a point that we should move on. Let's see. To gain, you must give. Mrs. Wernley, I don't know whether to interpret that as a serious comment or a joke.
Oh no, I was actually I couldn't remember off the top of my head exactly the wording of like Newton's law.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All I could think of was it within regards to nose picking at that point. So
yeah, I was trying to bring it back.
Yeah. Well, so am I, and not very successfully. So, okay, I'm cutting things off, Lanhams. You're fired here. Okay. Anyway, let's get back to somebody who actually does have some insight into this. Guy named C.S. Lewis. And on a side note, after class is done, preferably not in the chat here now, but if you really enjoyed the chat way of doing questions, reply to that email I sent out. You don't have to reply all, just reply to me and let me know, because I'm on the fence as to whether or not I should keep it around or not. So, okay, back to Lewis. The law of human nature is in the class of mathematics. All right. Point A. The law of human nature is that blank. Universal. The law of human nature is universal. Quoting Lewis, the first is, as I said in the first chapter, that though there are differences between the moral ideas of one time or country or those of another, the differences are not really very great. Not nearly so great as most people imagine. And you can recognize the same law running through all of them. Whereas mere conventions like the rule of the road or the kind of clothes people wear may differ to any extent. Next, point B. For that next blank, one set of moralities can be truer than another. One set of moralities can be truer than another. Quoting Lewis from page 13, when you think about these differences between the morality of one people and another, do you think that the morality of one people is ever better or worse than that of another? Have any of the changes been improvements? If not, then of course there could never be any moral progress. Progress means not just changing, but changing for the better. If no set of moral ideas were truer or better than any other, then there would be no sense of preferring civilized morality to savage morality. or Christian morality to Nazi morality. In fact, of course, we all do believe that some moralities are better than others. And also from that section, quoting Lewis, or put it this way, if your moral ideas can be truer and those of the Nazis less true, then there must be something, some real morality for them to be true about. The reason why your idea of New York can be truer or less true than mine is that New York is a real place existing quite apart from what either of us thinks. If when each of us said New York, each means merely the town I'm imagining in my own head, how could one of us have truer ideas than the other? And I absolutely love that New York illustration. Being in this class today is worth it just for that illustration, if nothing else. And I've used this before with people because I think it really does drive home the point. You know, if morality is if natural law and the moral law is a real thing, then we talk about progress all the time with regards to right and wrong. There needs to be something that we are progressing towards in order for there to be, in order for there to for the word progress to have any meaning whatsoever. Which leads me down to the next question. Nowadays,
I have a question before you ask that question.
Yeah, go for it.
When he says the New York that you're imagining in your head versus the one I'm imagining in my head, he doesn't mean truly imagining, but like your experience of New York versus my experience of New York.
So the way I've used it here in the Midwest is I've said to a kid, hey, I went to New York. And then I'll say, like, it was amazing. Like, I saw, like, there was the Mississippi River flowing by it. And then there's this big arch. It was really cool. And I loved it. It was so good. And they'll be like, oh, Mr. Carl, that's not New York. That's St. Louis. And I'll be like, that's your opinion. You know, driving home the point that New York is a real place. And if your description of it, and I'm thinking more of the factual, not necessarily like, oh, I love the pizza or, you know, that sort of thing. But if your description of it and my description of it differ, one of us has to be right, one of us has to be wrong, because it is a real place. It is a real thing that we can judge it against. So, good question. All right, I'll throw this question out, and then if anyone wants to go off of Janelle's question or just respond to these, we'll open it up here. Nowadays, you might hear someone say, you have your truth and I have my truth. How might Lewis respond to such a person? How would you respond?
In light of what Mike brought up about the tools not being used, you can't own truth. So that just feels like my answer right now. Neither one of you can. It's not something that can be owned.
Well, it depends. It depends on what you mean by own truth. Like you can't own truth. I would agree with that. You can't own truth in the sense that it's not mine. Well, actually, you know what? Now that I'm talking about it, yeah, Janelle, the way you said it's just fine. Never mind. So, because it's not my truth, it's not your truth, it's not whoever's truth. So,
one thing I used to respond a lot, I remember I don't know why, but it was about a string of like 2015, 2016, I had different conversations with people that kind of subscribed to relativism. And one thing I would say a lot was like, I found like most of those people, they didn't actually really truly subscribe to relativism. So that made it kind of easier for that kind of conversation. They just kind of like, again, they were really more like conforming to it, but I could tell that they didn't really believe it. Like I've also met atheists that claim to be atheists, and it turns out they're not, because for one, they're moralists, and true atheism isn't moralism. But so like I would just say like something like, okay, like about the sun, you know what I mean? So it's really just finding something to like, can we agree on that this is like a reality, this is really real for everybody? And I like what I heard in the last one, Jerry got even more to it, like a bus, like, you know, like, do you agree? Like basically like you know, this, like, okay, if someone says like the train is relative, like, okay, is this train is relative? Like, to you, it's here. To me, it's not. Like, okay, can we both agree that if you stand on the tracks at this time, the train's coming, like, you're going to die? And they'll be like, oh yeah, like, I agree. Like, that's obviously true. And then it's like, okay, so then you're agreeing that there are such things as real truths. And so like, that's usually what I would just kind of trying to find some kind of like beginning part where it's like, can we agree on something is true? Like, whether it's the sun or like gravity, like, okay, if we go at the top, like I was talking to one person at Cool Beans, if we go at the top of Cool Beans, like, do you agree? Like, if you jump like off of Cool Beans that you're going to fall, and we can all just agree that it's going to happen. It's like, oh yeah, I agree with that. So it's like, oh, so you don't actually really believe in relativism. You're just, you know what I mean? There's different reasons that, you know, because really, like, really true belief in that is really, as far as I can see, it's surrealism. And I haven't actually met a real surrealist in my life.
Okay.
So I've yet to, except for myself at one point, actually, I gotten to the point where I basically I didn't believe in anything. So like, basically, unless you believe in something, unless you don't believe in belief, you're going to contradict yourself somewhere if you subscribe to relativism. And so it's actually not that hard to kind of like, not necessarily like, hey, let me put you in a corner and like show you how you're wrong, but more just like, let me listen to you. And as I'm listening to what you're saying, you're going to hear how you're contradicting yourself. Yeah. And I'm just going to be like, yeah.
Well, that's, and
if someone says to you that there is no absolute truth, just say, is that true?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
If you can get them to make a true statement, they'll contradict themselves.
Well, and that's, you know what, and it's funny, and again, I'm thinking through a lot of the lectures I've listened to by Jordan Peterson, but that's one of the things that's quite challenging when dealing with somebody who embraces postmodernism. Like, postmodernism does not require you to adhere to any one set of values or with any sort of consistency. And and that is postmodernism, for all practical purposes, is very much, at least in my opinion, kind of the spirit of the age. At least that's what I'm seeing amongst the kids that I've worked with over the last, few years or whatnot. But also, I want to piggyback off something you said, Jeremy. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And I wrote this down as you were talking. You gave a perfect example of a herd instinct. I mean, I'm thinking of my experience with, how do I say this? It may still be popular, but there was a point in time where if you were not a Christian, especially here in this area, you embraced the mantle of atheism. You didn't fully understand what that meant, but then when you start talking to them, what they end up describing is agnostic, because they're superstitious. They believe in, various other, more or less superstitious stuff. But they embraced that word atheist because it, was kind of like what the cool people around them embraced, sort of thing. So, man, yeah, I wish I'd wrote that down before the lesson, because that's a killer example of a herd instinct. So
like, generally, I guess what I was trying to say, the shorter version of like answering that is that I like to just like ask them questions like about what they're meaning. That's kind of my natural bent, though. I realized that I had found something very similar in the Socratic method, the original Socratic method, where it's just like a series of asking questions, and you'll see eventually, like, whatever you're posing is true will contradict itself most likely eventually. And so, like, I mean, even the true statement of like, relativism is true, that's a self-refuting statement. So like, they can't even really, like, I mean, relativism is actually, it is a self-refuting belief system. And so but usually, like, I've personally found it's really like and so I think it's been easier for me in those conversations, because usually the people haven't really thought it out. Like, they haven't really embraced it as much as, like, you're saying. Like, I've seen, like, I saw this David Keller or something. Let's see, what is his name? Sorry, I saw one of these like series of videos where he's talking with different people and like basically why they didn't believe in Christianity. And one person, like, it seemed like he really was subscribing, because he kept using the term like, well, just whatever resonates with you. He just kept saying, he was like, well, like, if this is, what about this? And he's like, I don't even think it matters if it's right or wrong. That's not the point. It's just, the point is if it resonates with you or not. And he kept saying that. And I was like, oh, I could see how that would be. To me, I feel like that person is like, they're gone. You know, like having that conversation almost is like right now in the state you're in, I can see how that'd be challenging. But usually when I sit down and talk to the individual, there's a ton of stuff that they don't actually believe is relative at all.
Mhm.
They don't believe their mother's existence is relative. They don't believe like even love is relative. You know,
Mhm.
all this stuff, they don't actually believe that. So it's actually really easy to just like let them explain their life and just start talking about what they believe in. And then they'll like, really, I find you sometimes there doesn't even have to be a point of like, oh, I'm wrong. It'll
Mhm.
come to a point of like, well, they'll basically refute what they said in the beginning. Like, I don't really believe that, but like, this is what I.
Yeah. Hey, I saw Mackenzie and Will's comment here, and it plays into what I wanted to say in response to it. And Brian and Melissa, I see your comments as well. I'll address those next. Is the point to prove we are right? And that's one of the thoughts I had, Jeremy, as you were talking. I very much, like you and I are thinking along the same lines. Like, I find it so much more effective talking with people about morality and Christianity using the Socratic method. But there is an art form to it because it can become I've seen people use it in a way, it's kind of the gotcha sort of thing. Like all of us in our discussions, especially if we're talking through something that we haven't taken the time to think through systematically, we very quickly will get to a point, even in discussing Christianity, where we'll say something contradictory, like very much so. So using the Socratic method, using questioning, I think is the best approach in talking with people. But you want to do so in a way that it's not like, gotcha. And I'm not suggesting that's what you were saying, Jeremy, by any means. But it's just, again, some of the thoughts popping into my mind. But also, in response to that question, proving we are right. A lot of people, unfortunately, Mackenzie, that I've seen on videos. Oh, great. I just got a notification. My wife's spending money on Amazon. Okay. Anyway, I've seen a lot of people who use their platforms in a way that it very much comes across that way. That I'm going to use my platform to blast people and show you how much you suck so you can see Jesus. I mean, seriously, it's unfortunately, I think that's the way things go, and we can all go down that road. But if our goal is truth, and with regards to this book, the truth we're focusing on is the moral law. But for us Christians thinking further down the line from where Lewis is at, truth of Christ, the goal should never be to prove to somebody how right we are. The goal should be to, hey, I want to find out where you're at. So I'm going to ask questions. And as you're giving me answers, let's have a dialogue. And, it's the whole fundamental principle of Christianity, speak the truth in love. And if you can do that, I think that's where these conversations really do bear fruit, at least.
I mean, ultimately, it's for people's hearts to come closer to the Father's, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's for people that, like, that's what Jesus died for, so that we can have an intimate relationship with him. And unfortunately, what a lot of people, what's happening is they're fathered by lies. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you do tear down strongholds, that can actually help them. But how you do it, though, I think there isn't really a formula for that. It
Mm-hmm.
is something that you are led by the Holy Spirit if you're willing to be in each and every moment, but you're also prepared beforehand in your own intimacy with God. So that's my like personal experience with it. But as far as heart posture, like we're always being purified in our heart posture too when we do go in a conversation, so that we can operate as pure of a heart as the God has given us the faith to have in that moment when we're having a conversation with somebody.
Yeah. And you don't ever want to discount the leading of the Holy Spirit in any conversations of this nature, because ultimately God knows where a person's heart is, and we want to default to that. I don't know if that's explicitly where you're going with that, Jeremy, but
well, it's just that it's a part of it. Not like trying to
Yeah.
I know like when people hear certain things, like I don't know what you've heard before, but I've heard some people kind of talk about like don't come in like prepared at all, like don't bother like learning anything. Just like let the Holy Spirit lead you. So I'm not talking about that specifically, but
Mm-hmm.
I am obviously talking about what Jesus was very clear about, that he sent us the Holy Spirit to mentor us.
Mm-hmm.
First and foremost, to understand what Jesus is talking about in his teaching, and his teaching is to love. Part of it, as you guys pointed out in your last one, which we watched, like to love your neighbor. And so what that looks like.
Yeah.
And like, obviously love isn't limited to like what sometimes people make it today, which is like, say, to just say what you want to hear, which in fact isn't actually love.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go over to Melissa's question here about 12 blind people touching an elephant, which I think is a dangerous experiment to set up, by the way. How would I describe it? Well, and maybe in response, Melissa, to your comment, maybe that whole witch thing comes into play where, ultimately when you're talking about the moral law with regards to different angles of things, I suppose one thought is you want to be careful not to turn the moral law into a relativistic law, which can be the danger if you're not careful. But then also making sure that definitionally you're talking about the same thing. Because there's certain words and phrases, oh great, there's a whole bunch of things popping up. There's different words or phrases that I think you can say that are kind of charged into culture. And if you can use synonyms to get to an agreed definition, you can begin moving beyond talking at cross purposes, sort of thing. And then Brian, kind of like the Gospels, different points of view from 4 different people telling the same story of Jesus. Yeah. I mean, with the Gospels, they're I don't know that I personally would use that example because 3 of the Gospels are called the Synoptic Gospels, meaning they're, I can't remember what the percent is. Something like Pastor Jerry, 80-ish% the same.
Around there.
Something like that. But I see the point you're trying to make. Let's see. It sounds like that method is good for the Holy Spirit to plant a seed in a person's mind and get them to think about absolute truth. I mean, anytime we have a conversation, I mean, we're called to be salt and light. And that's always the hope, Brian. I agree, is to leave a seed. But like Jeremy was saying, like the verse that comes to my mind, and Pastor Jerry, maybe you can, this reference off the top of your head, but study to show thyself approved.
Yeah, 2 Timothy.
Yeah. Like I said, 2 Timothy. And
not be ashamed. Yeah.
Yeah. I would never say the Holy Spirit can't use something that you're not prepared for. I mean, the Holy Spirit absolutely can, but outside of the special prompting of the Holy Spirit, it's our job to honor God with all our heart, with all our mind, and with all our strength. And it's real easy to neglect the mind part of that. And I'm speaking as one who's guilty myself. Let's see. And I believe there is an absolute right in her doing so. I don't know what that's a reference to, Melissa. Oh, gotcha. Yeah, well, payday's on Wednesday, so we'll just see if that. Mrs. Carl, you came up in conversation. I saw your Amazon purchase. Anyway, okay, well, back to more spiritual things. Brian says hi. Okay, let's go down. Let's finish this up here. Page 4, finally, the first blank is, wait for it, conclusion. Quoting Lewis, I conclude then that though the difference between people's ideas of decent behavior often make you suspect that there is no real natural law or behavior at all, yet the things we are bound to think about, yet the things we are bound to think about these differences really prove just the opposite. And that's the whole focus here of chapter 2, that we may make the argument that there's significant differences that disprove a universal moral law, but the more you start getting into analyzing what we believe and the way it plays out, I think the stronger case is that there is a universal moral law. And then number 4, man, I know a lot of people, you because it's almost October, are getting to the Halloween spirit, and Lewis must have known that because that next blank, objection number 3, question mark, is witches. Fact or fiction? Please make sure you spell witches correctly. All right, here we go. Quoting Lewis, I have met people who exaggerate the differences because they have not distinguished between differences of morality and differences of belief about facts. For example, one man said to me, 300 years ago, people in England were putting witches to death. Was that what you call the rule of human nature or right conduct? But surely the reason we do not execute witches is that we do not believe there are such things. If we did, if we really thought that there were people going about who had sold themselves to the devil and received supernatural powers from him in return and were using those powers to kill their neighbors or drive them mad or bring bad weather, surely we would all agree if anyone deserved the death penalty, that these filthy quislings did. There is no difference of moral principle here. The difference is simply about a matter of fact. It may be a great advance in knowledge not to believe in witches. There is no moral advance in not executing them when you do not think they are there. So, thought that was a brilliant response, although in terms of the flow of the chapter, it would have been nice if Lewis had backed it up a paragraph before the conclusion. And this last question, I mean, oh gosh. It's really more of a statement than a question, but I'll read it anyway. Applying the law of human nature is often layered with complexities, as we've alluded to in so many of the comments here. The man who asked Lewis about the case of witches thought he had made a clever counter-argument. A word of caution: be careful when applying the law of human nature to current events. Thoughts. And the history of that comment / question, I had to call up my pastor. Some of you might know him. I had to call my pastor on, I think it was Saturday night, because I was working through some of this and looking with so much going on in the world today in terms of, cultural unrest and all the election, all that stuff. Like I thought, you know what? I mean, so much of what Lewis talks about is absolutely applicable today. But as Pastor Jerry and I were talking through it, it became clear that a simple application of even something as basic as the law of human nature becomes complicated very, very quickly, because you have so many competing interests kind of shuffling into things. So I guess in conclusion on my end, what I would challenge you with is this: as you're having conversations with people, absolutely, I mean, be able to articulate that there is a law of human nature using some of these arguments, but be patient and be thoughtful if you start down the road of like applying it to contemporary events. In general, as you're processing this, I would recommend that you think about it in terms of more historical events that aren't charged with the emotion of the day and age. But is the law is the law of human nature applicable in all these current events? Absolutely. It gets real tricky if you're not careful. So any thoughts on that? In light of the time, I'm fine with that. Let me finish this up with a scriptural connection. With the law of human nature being the theme of these last two chapters, my mind goes back again to Romans 2:14-15. Indeed, when Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature things required of the law, they are a law for themselves, even though they do not have the law, since they show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts now accusing, now even defending them. That's a very good scriptural reference, arguing for this concept of moral law that Lewis has been referring to these last two chapters. So if you don't have something to memorize in the Bible, that would be a good verse to commit to memory. But then the focus of one of Lewis's counter arguments this whole idea of moral progress, that we can rightly judge some groups' moralities as better or worse than others, also has a scriptural foundation that we can stand on as well, because we see God making this distinction. I'm going to hearken back to Deuteronomy 9, verse 5. It is not because of your righteousness, of your integrity, that you are going to take possession of their land. This is God speaking to the Israelites through Moses. He's basically saying, hey, look, it's not because you guys are so awesome morally that you're getting this land, which, so good. The important part, though, is next. But on account of the wickedness of those nations, the Lord your God will drive them out before you, to accomplish what he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And clearly what we see in this passage is not just God's faithfulness and his always fulfilling his promises, but more importantly, that there is such a thing as moral law that can be applied to people outside of the philosophical and cultural worldview that we have, and God alludes to that here in talking with Israel. So that's the end for me here for chapter 2. Any concluding thoughts, remarks? Amy, I don't want to leave you hanging out there. Is there anything you want to jump in with? Because I feel like I've neglected you, Amy. Okay. See, is there anyone else? Will, do I want to pick on you too? Anything you want to? Cool. Tony, I'm not calling on you because you'll just say something about Patrick Mahomes. So anyway,
Let me say something.
As long as it's not about Patrick Mahomes.
No. So since Sharon's not here, I just want to say you've done a good job again, Scott, today. And that was so awesome when she said that. I mean that sincerely, though. And I love you guys. Love what you guys are bringing in. The only side thing too is just bringing, if we're talking about having conversations with others and stuff, probably goes without saying, but I don't know if it was specifically said, also obviously sometimes just listening and being present is an awesome thing that I've watched move in people so much, and just kind of walking with them for a time, which sometimes can be hard for me because I also think of well, I don't know if there's another hour, you know what I mean? And I want to make sure that they know the most important things, not my truths, but my truth, Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, not that. And so I love that heart posture. I really learned from the Lord is that I said to Andrea, I said to other people, it's not about you being wrong and me being right. It's about us both being wrong and him being right. So.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. And I couldn't add to that. So no, I'll tell you what, it's a joy doing this. And I mean, shoot, you guys are a blessing to me. And I just appreciative of you guys continuing to stick around and do this week after week. On that topic, next week, we're going to look at chapter 3, the reality of the law. And I'm really, here's my daughter. And I really like the progression that Lewis is going through here because, we've spent 2 chapters now discussing the moral law, how it is a thing, and arguing for that. But there are consequences to truth. And Lewis is going to get to that point with these last 3 chapters of book 1, that there are some consequences that once you accept that fact, you have to deal with as well. So I got nothing else. I mean, no, there's the Mahomes comments again. Anyway, hopefully Matt Brown will be back next week so we can pick on him. And otherwise, thank you everyone again. I'll hang around here for another 2 or 3 minutes if you want to say something off air. And awesome. Have a good week. Let me know. Hey, email me if you end up using any of this stuff in any of the conversations you have this week, because I would love to hear about it. Yeah, so that's it.